Man After Man by Dougal Dixon. Unofficial audiobook by Braden Kennedy. Her ancestors lived in the treetops that once covered the area. Indeed, her relatives still live in the forests of the steamy lowlands, climbing the branches, eating the soft fruits and grubs. Her way of life, however, is completely different. Hers is a dry landscape of yellow grass, with brown and black thickets of hardened thorn trees. Her woodland diet is different too, because there are no soft fruits and juicy buds or grubs here. Solid nuts and tough seeds are her main foodstuffs, and there is nothing else she makes do with coarse roots and tubers. Hard-shelled insects and dry lizards abound, and she often extracts what little nutrition there is from these. Her jaws and teeth reflect the fact that she has to eat more than her ancestors did to gain the same amount of goodness, and she has to chew it more thoroughly. Accordingly, her front teeth have become smaller to make room for broad and flat back teeth that grind down masses of coarse food. This has not happened suddenly. It was developed over thousands and thousands of years. Those who study her remains will give her a name. They will call her Ramapithecus. The other animals that lived here show the same specializations in their teeth. Pigs and antelope feed on low-lying plants, and giraffes browse in higher trees. These too have broad back teeth, but she has a long way to go before she is well adapted as they are. For one thing, the grasses are very tall, and when she is on the ground, she is lost and cannot peer over them. There are fierce hunting beasts around too, so she needs to climb the trees for safety as well as to see distances. The other animals run away when threatened, but she does not have the speed, running on all fours on short limbs. Stiffly, she pushes herself to the hind feet and sways unsteadily for a time. Now she can see over the top of the grass, and what's more, she feels cooler. Less of her back is exposed to the hot sun, and the cool breeze she now feels soothes her neck and chest. Overheating was not a problem in the forest shade. The more comfortable temperature, however, is contracted by discomfort in her legs, as this is not a natural pose for her. Maybe she can move more quickly like this, with only 2 feet touching the ground. She tries, but her legs are not strong enough and are the wrong shape for this to work. Her body naturally topples forward, and she cannot move her hind legs quickly enough to stay upright. She descends once more onto all fours. No, she will have to stay near the trees if she wants to survive. The climate is much drier now, and the scenery has changed considerably. The continent has been moving, gradually splitting the landscape across with faults, while elongated slabs have slowly subsided from forming long, deep rift valleys with strings of shallow lakes in their floors. Molten material has been brought up from the Earth's interior, and active volcanoes line the edges of the rift. Grasslands have spread everywhere, and there are many clumps of trees, but no continuous forest. At the edge of one such small clump, a small creature drops from the tree to the ground, and then stands upright. He looks around for danger, and, seeing none, grunts a signal. A dozen others who drop from the branches cluster around him include other males, much smaller females, some with babies, and children. It is a large family group. Food has become sparse in their thicket, and they are moving. Further down the valley, a patch of green by a lake holds out some hope. With a confident stride, they march downhill, leaving footprints in the volcanic ash that carpets the whole area from the last eruption. Their stride and their stance show that their legs have developed considerably in the last 5 million years. From permanently bowed structures only good for climbing trees, their legs have developed into straight limbs that can carry their bodies vertically. Their arms, however, have changed little during that time. They still have the curved fingers or grasping branches, and the shoulder socket angled upwards to allow a higher reach, both features of tree-living way of life. If the landscape becomes drier, though, then the trees more sparse, beings that are better adapted for a ground-dwelling existence will be more likely to survive than this partially tree-dwelling creature, Australopithecus afarensis. That time is not far off. Volcanoes still bubble, grassy plains still spread along the rift valleys, but now only isolated umbrella-shaped trees and lone thorn thickets break up the yellow of the landscape. Down by the edge of the lake, a pack of large hyenas has brought down an animal that looks like a short-necked giraffe with moose-like horns, and are tearing its corpse apart. In one mass of bushes, a number of heavy-looking beasts forage among the thorny vegetation for leaves and berries. If it were not for their upright stance, they would be mistaken for chimpanzees, as they have the same heavy bodies and the same deep jaws with massive teeth. These also belong to a species of Australopithecus called Australopithecus robustus, and they are perfectly at home here as they contentedly chew any piece of vegetable material they find. Suddenly, the nearby grass erupts. About a dozen screeching figures run at the feeders. They look much like the others, but are more lightly built, and their faces do not have such a heavy-jawed look. They belong to another species, A. africanus. The feeders stop eating and snarl back, staring defensively at the newcomers and showing their teeth and gums. They are not to be chased away from their feeding ground. The attackers halt their assault. Their intended victims seem more determined than they anticipated. The attackers back slowly away, keeping up their aggressive noises and trying not to appear vulnerable, then regroup some distance away. The berries of the thicket are lost to them. They turn their attention to the hyenas feeding down by the lake and, as a group, charge them. The hyenas are startled by the sudden assault, and in a panic, they abandon their kill. The attackers gather around the corpse, some of them tearing at the meat, while others stand guard, waving sticks and snarling at the cheated hyenas. These creatures can eat meat as well as plants, and can combine forces in order to procure it. Their larger relatives in the thicket continue munching their berries. Meat eating and cooperative hunting is not for them. It seems the same place, for the landscape has changed very little, though the climate is now much cooler. Large chimpanzee-like creatures still forage for berries amongst the bushes. These creatures, however, are larger than the earlier berry eaters and have very heavy jawbones. Later, anthropologists gave them various names such as Zinjanthropus, Nutcracker Man, before deciding they were of the much earlier A. robustus. Not far away, several much smaller ape-like beasts, evolved from the earlier A. africanus, carry a dead antelope between them. That is not all they carry. They have stones that have been chipped into edges, points, and blades, for these creatures are tool makers, and as such, they have a culture, later referred to as the Paleolithic, or Old Stone Age. Their scientific name reflects the tool-making skill. It is Homo habilis, meaning handyman. The two groups pass very close to one another, but totally ignore each other's presence. Now they have evolved in such diverse directions, they no longer compete for the same food. She is a member of the first group of humanoid creatures to move out of Africa and spread across Europe and Asia. She crouches in a cave entrance in what would become known as China, but far away, in places that will be called Spain, Java, and Tanzania, there are beings just like her. If she stood up, she would seem to be very similar to a 20th century human, with a heavier jaw, protruding eyebrows, and a flat forehead. Her upright stance gives her species the name Homo erectus. As she watches the hunters drag home the slain bison, while other females carry back their handfuls of hackberries and pine kernels, her thoughts are only on the food that they bring and how the food is to be prepared. Cooperation with others and skills learned from her parents provide her with the food. With a stick, she stirs the powdery whiteness in the fire pit before her, uncovering the deep red glow. She adds dry twigs to bring the glowing embers to life. She cannot remember when or how the fire started, but hers is the responsibility for keeping it going. It is a heavy responsibility, too, since fire makes the meat tender enough to eat easily. Its smoke prefers what meat they do not eat immediately, and its frightening light keeps away the fierce night animals. She knows that it is her responsibility because it is the group of 23 who occupy the cave have talked it over, not in words, but in significant sounds that mean something to those in the group. Long stride on the road to civilization. A horse develops before him. Red soil from one part of his stone dish has been applied with a pad of moss to the cave wall to block in the same basic shape. Now he takes a soot and smears it along the figure's back, pointing up its ears. The same black pigment goes into making the legs and hooves. In the confined space and the flickering light of his flame, it is difficult for him to stand back and appreciate his work. He knows, however, that he has done it to the best of his ability, and this gives him a deep satisfaction. Squeaking through the narrow limestone passages towards the cave mouth, he passes other paintings. Bulls, reindeer, bison, and rhinoceros have been depicted here since long before his time. He blows out his flame and stands, dazzled, on the limestone shelf, looking down the hill at a wooded gorge below. Smoke rising against a far cliff shows where his people live, sheltered against the coming winter beneath the overhang. He belongs to the species Homo sapiens, subspecies sapiens, and there are probably no more than 10,000 like him in the area that will one day be known as Central France. Further to the north, on the tundra plains of Germany, his cousins Homo sapiens neanderthalensis are now extinct, either wiped out in the latest surge of the Ice Age, or else so interbred with the more successful Homo sapiens sapiens that their characteristics have disappeared in their offspring. It is Homo sapiens sapiens, or Cro-Magnon man, with his artistry advanced and his advanced Paleolithic culture, who will be the ancestor of mankind to come. The river valley has always produced the best plants, and since most food comes from one plant or another, the river valleys of northern Europe are well settled. With the knowledge that plants grow from seeds, the people of the settlement have gathered seed and planted it in the fertile valley soil. When the plants are ripe, they are cut down with stone-bladed sickles, and the seeds ground down to flour by rolling them between coarse stones. What can be done for plants can also be done for animals. On the cold plains to the north, people still follow migrating herds of reindeer, so that the meat is always available. But the settlers can do better than this. Their animals, their cattle, sheep, goats, and pigs, are kept penned near the settlement so that the meat, wool, and milk are constantly accessible. As a result, for the first time in history, substantial houses can be built on frames of tree trunks, hewn by the stone implements, walled by dry clay and sticks. Straw, left over from the grain harvest, goes into making the roof. Now there is also the time and opportunity for pottery and horn ornaments to be crafted. It is the era known as the Neolithic, or New Stone Age. The cultivation of plants and the domestication of animals have both been heralded by this new culture. It will not be long before the settlers, with their more stable lifestyle and the time to apply their minds to abstract problems, learn to smelt and use metals, first bronze and then iron, and then this knowledge will spread throughout most of the populated world. Lucius Septimus chews his twice-cooked bread at the entrance of his hide tent, having cleaned his iron weaponry and armor. Out there, in the rain, the great choppy sea that beats against the north limit of the Gaul is an uninviting sight. The wild Britons of the lands to the north have been a thorough nuisance, giving constant aid to the rebellious Gauls and holding up the establishment of Roman civilization in these northern lands. Also, it is said there is a great mineral wealth to be found there. Stories abound of wealthy mineral merchants making their fortunes by plying these dangerous waters. Certainly, the military victory achieved there by the late Julius Caesar was small, but the talk is that other invasions are planned. He certainly hopes not. He'd rather be serving in the newly annexed Aegyptus on the other end of the empire. Only the generals and the officers in the big tent at the end of the row know what the long-term plans of the new emperor Augustus are. Lucius only goes where he is told, and fights where he is told. He feels lucky to be part of the great nation of Rome, a nation that controls practically the whole world, and will do so forever. Empire after empire developed around the Mediterranean Sea and spread across Europe, Africa, and Asia, clashing with the other empires found there. Then they collapsed, and usually the culture and technology generated with each empire collapsed with it. Adolf Axelvedson understands little of this. He is about to sail home, guided by the stone that seeks the North Star. He does realize, however, that the places visited by the long ships during the summer raids seem to have different histories and display different ruins. Almost everywhere in the world, shaven men teach the Christian faith and vehemently denounce the sacred names of Thor and Odin. Everywhere else, people are adapting this faith, even some of Adolf's own people. In this country, the Arab kingdom of Spain is a mixture of religions. Dark-skinned people who scorn the Christian religion have been settling here for a long time, alongside Christian people. They worship God in domed buildings, surrounded by spindly towers. What's more, they are gardeners and poets, and have technical knowledge that is lacking elsewhere. Adolf's abiding memory of the last raid is a tower with sails. Ships, like his own, use the winds. They catch it in their sails and it drives them along. These people, however, use the wind to turn wheels and grind grain. It is 69 days since they set out from Palos, and all that time they have been sailing westwards, except for a brief stop for provisioning the Canary Islands. Now they have arrived in India. Pablo Diego chads himself for mistrusting the captain. There is no way of telling whether or not the voyage is foolhardy. They just kept sailing westwards, totally the wrong direction for India, to the edge of the world, possibly to be admired by sticky seaweed or eaten by sea monsters. They could tell how far north or south they were by measuring the angles of the stars, but there was no way of telling how far west they had sailed. Several times he and the crew were on the verge of mutiny. They were wrong, however, and now here they are, safe beneath the palm trees on the warm beach, while offshore the three proud ships lie resting at an anchor. It is the Indians that puzzle Pablo. Evidently, this is not the mainland of Asia, but one of the outlying islands, possibly Japan's. But where are the fabulous treasures, the golden jewels they have been promised? Friendly or not, the gifts the Indians bring are rubbish, beads, and strangely colored birds. Nevertheless, they do have gold rings in their noses, so there is wealth somewhere. If there is, why are the Indians not using it? They seem to have nothing, living in grass huts and growing strange plants for food. That does not worry Pablo. The captain has said that after a brief rest they will sail around more of these islands. He can be sure that further to the west is the main continent of civilized people who know what to do with their wealth. The train rattles out from beneath the narrow paper houses, sending up thick clouds of black smoke that settles as soot on the ornate carvings of the eaves, then coughs its way along the low embankment between the flooded fields of rice towards the distant cotton mills. If there is anything important that emphasizes the changes that have come to Renzo Nariaki's beloved Nippon, it is this. He is an old man now, and he can still remember his place in the feudal society of Tokugawa shogunate before it was overthrown. Then, with civil war and the emplacement of the Emperor Meiji, the barbarians who had long been attempting to gain a foothold finally flooded in. They arrived at the request of the new emperor and changed everything. They were altering all aspects of society. At least he still had an emperor, but the government was not like that of a place called France. It still had a navy, but run along the lines of the British Navy. Their industry was being reorganized into the American style, while the army was no longer the army of the samurai. It was now like the army of Germany. The train had disappeared into the dark mills now, ready to pick up a heavy load. The traditional road transport could never have handled the volume of goods now being produced. It's probably like this all over the world, thinks Nariaki. The foreigners are imposing their way of life everywhere. Or perhaps we're observing the ways of the foreigners' way of life. Time will tell.